Welcome back, everybody. This is another episode of TrekWars at OSU. I'm Joseph Orosco. I'm the co-director of the Anarres Project for Alternative Futures. The Anarres Project is a forum for conversations, projects, and initiatives that envision a future free of domination, exploitation, war, and empire. And one of the things that we engage in is this channel, which is TrekWars at OSU. TrekWars at OSU has become the name that we use for a variety of different programs in which we investigate alternative futures through the lens of speculative fictions and works, television series, uh, different kinds of video and writing to help us imagine and to help set our imagination on thinking about these alternative and better futures. And one of the things that we've done in the past few years is to do an end of the year wrap up that we call the best of sci-fi fantasy from Trek Wars at OSU. And we didn't do one last year because things just got out of hand with a lot of different kind of work, but we're back this year and I'm excited about the guests that we have to join us today. So welcome to everybody. I'll go around and mention each of you, and then we can you can say a little bit about your background. First and foremost is one of our oldest collaborators, not old in the sense of being old, but in the sense of one of the folks who's been with us the longest in terms of Trek War at OSU. In fact, one of the co-founders of Trek Wars at OSU, Dr. Randall Millstein. Dr. Millstein, welcome back to our channel.
Well, thanks for having me. I really enjoy this. I am a faculty member at Oregon State University. I'm an astronomer by profession, and I teach in the physics department, but I also teach a course in the science of science fiction in the University Honors College as well. And I work very closely with the Oregon NASA Space Grant Consortium as well for outreach in astronomical topics. And also I do lots of lectures with them on popular culture, especially sci-fi.
We also, Dr. Millstein and I, and with another collaborator from the Trek Wars at OSU, Diana Rollman, have started a new class in which we are taking students to think about science fiction and fantasy through cosplay, particularly at the Portland, Oregon Rose City Comic-Con. And we did our first round of that this last year. So that was one of the big highlights for 2023 is taking a group of students to do some cosplay at Rose City. So that's another thing that we've been working on. So welcome, Randy. It's good to see you back.
Glad to be here.
Our next guest is someone that we've also worked with for a long time here at the Anarres Project, though on another show that's been on hiatus for a little while, Future States Focus. My guest is Robyn Morris, and so she was my co-host for the Future States Focus show for a couple of years, and then our schedules got away from us in a lot of different ways. But welcome back, Robyn.
Thank you for having me. I am currently a faculty member at Prairie State College in Chicago, Illinois, where I teach ethics and intro to philosophy and comparative religions. And currently, I'm really sad that I missed this cosplay class while I was at OSU. What the heck?
Well, just come back to the Pacific Northwest, and you can come with us.
I mean, we're looking at Seattle right now. Cross our fingers.
Welcome back, Robyn. And our newest guest, in addition to the Trek Wars at OSU collective, is Kaja. Kaja and I interacted briefly in 2023 at a conference on Latinx sci-fi and fantasy in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And she is an accomplished writer and critic of sci-fi. So we thought it'd be great to have her come on and talk a little bit about some of the best sci-fi that she encountered, or fantasy, or speculative fiction in general that she encountered in 2023. So Kaja, welcome to the Anarres Project.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be on this platform and to have this discussion with you. Again, my name is Kaja Gjelde. I am a Sami American researcher, writer, and current PhD student at the University of New Mexico. And my background is in Indigenous studies from the Arctic University of Norway. My research focuses are mostly on speculative Latinx fiction, as well as Indigenous fiction and Nordic fiction. So I'm a PhD student at UNM, but I also teach Nordic fiction through Edmonds Community College, as well as I'm a writer and contributor to Women at Warp's blog, which is a feminist Star Trek podcast.
Welcome. A great Women in Work is a great platform. So shout out to you all for the work that you do there. Some really, really incisive commentary and criticism of that fandom. So so we're here to talk about the best of 2023. And we're talking here in terms of speculative fiction. We're talking mostly about TV and video for now, TV movies, but we can sort of talk about some other things that might have impacted us. But the idea here for our program, as you all know, is to think about stuff that came out that made us think a little bit more about the possibility of alternative ways of living, thinking about ways of living free from, as the pitch goes, domination, exploitation, war, and empire. And so what we can do, I'll start us off and get us thinking about this. I wanted to think about some things that were impactful for me in 2023. Some really good stuff came out. As folks know, in the TrekWars universe for us, I'm the Star Trek guy. And there was some great Star Trek that came out this year in 2023. I'm just going to mention a couple of things that I really, really liked. In Star Trek Strange New Worlds, there was this really interesting crossover event that happened between Star Trek Strange New Worlds and Lower Decks. A couple of the characters in the animated series made live action appearances in Strange New Worlds. I really liked this crossover event. I watched it just the other day. And noticed some things before that I hadn't noticed, again, as you do usually with rewatches, but some really emotionally poignant stuff. Strange New Worlds really pushed a lot of emotional buttons for me in the second season that came out this year. I also wanted to indicate that Strange New Worlds did a musical number, a musical episode that was very controversial in the Star Trek fandom. A lot of people went back and forth all over social media about loving this or hating this. I personally loved it. I'm a fan of musicals in general, even though the musical styles that they chose to do for this episode weren't my favorite. It sounded too much like Rent over and over and over again in the song choices. But I really like the way that they told the story and set up the premise about why everyone would be singing. That really, I think, expanded sort of our imagination and thinking about exploring strange new places and forms of communication and the role of music and song, I think, in thinking about the human experience. And so I know, whenever I read commentary that said, "Oh, I hated the singing," I was thinking, there's something you're not really getting about how this show tries to push us to think about what it means to be human. And song and music is definitely a component of all of that. So I really liked Strange New Worlds in a couple of different ways. I liked Ahsoka too. I really got into Ahsoka this year in the Star Wars universe. Really brought me into thinking about some of the mysticism in Star Wars that I wasn't familiar with before because I never watched the animated series a lot. But I have to say, Ahsoka really got me thinking more about getting and delving deeper into the lore of Star Wars in a way that I'd never really been interested in doing before. And as we were talking about before, Randy and I are going to a Comic-Con in a couple of weeks here, and I'm going to be doing an Ahsoka cosplay, not Ahsoka, but a cosplay from Ahsoka. So it touched me. Of course, Andor, amazing stuff. Really, I thought I didn't want to talk about that one because it just seemed too obvious for our work. And one of our regulars, Mohamed Shakibnia, was not available. I'm sure he probably would have talked about Andor. But what a show to really highlight the sort of political underbelly of the Star Wars universe, and particularly the psychology of fascism. So Andor was one of the things that I really, really enjoyed in 2023. So those are things that I was really um, happy for in 23. But here's my big reveal. Dun dun dun. I want to talk about what is the thing that was most impactful for me in 2023. And I think Robyn and I had a conversation like about a month ago, so I think she already knows what I'm going to go for. But for me, the Barbie movie was the best thing I saw in 2023 that expanded my imagination of the possible. So how does Barbie end up here? I think Barbie is a classical, fits into the genre of speculative imaginings. It's got a kind of magical realism feel, but it fits more into sort of the the genre of satirical utopian literature. And so I won't go into the summary of the movie because probably everybody has seen it. But what I liked about this movie is that it really, I think, pushed a lot of thinking in terms of questions about what does gender mean? What are our gender roles? How did both for people who embody maleness, people who embody femaleness. What do these roles mean, and what are perhaps the limitations of these roles in our society? How do these roles perhaps keep us from being able to enjoy lives in such a way in which we can um, think about our full individual flourishing? Um, so I think that a lot of people have called this a feminist film, and it is a feminist film, but it's a radically feminist film in the sense that it critiques not only the sort of oppression of women and the ways in which women are oppressed, but also the ways, I think, importantly, in which patriarchy damages men. And that was a really sort of important take. But it also, I think, in some ways took on certain forms of second wave feminism too. The idea of girl power and empowerment, asking the question, what exactly do we want in a liberated world? What do we want emancipation to look like? In some ways in conversations I've had, I think that this is an old question that is a really radical question, but goes back to something like Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex. What does it really, what will emancipated womanhood look like that's not through the lens of male patriarchy? And I think that Barbie starts to get us thinking that way. And when I was watching this film, I was like making all these connections. There's a little bit of bell hooks going on here. There's some Simone de Beauvoir. So much was going on, and I sat for days thinking about this film afterwards. So for me, most impactful in terms of a film that pushed the radical imagination, I think, about gender and liberation and emancipation in the future, the Barbie movie in 2023 was what I really enjoyed. So, did you all see the film? Did you enjoy it, or did it fall flat for any of you?
We
I haven't
just
seen it.
watched it at our house, actually. Like, my daughter was away at college and she's very like, oh, don't watch things without me. So, she just graduated, and when she got home, we watched it. Michael didn't watch it. He left the room pretty early on in the film, and I was like, man, you would have really liked this, because I think at the beginning there is that sense of like, oh, this is just going to be a woman, like, man hating whatever, like, woman power movie. But I, like you, I really enjoyed that nod to like the ways in which patriarchy and oppression swings both ways, right? It dehumanizes the oppressed, and through dehumanizing the oppressed, we are then dehumanized as well, right? Like, I thought that was really good. It was really good. I was impressed.
Kaya, did you have a chance to check it out?
Yeah, and this I think is a really wonderful example of how speculative fiction enters in the mainstream and really makes us think about social issues. Because I don't know how you could kind of make Barbie super realistic or anything like that, but if you were to just kind of present a biopic about bell hooks or something like that, and trying to show oppression in the very real world. I think it would be for a very particular audience, and it wouldn't enter into the mainstream necessarily. And I feel like this was a way for that conversation to get started, and it's through this kind of blending of real and childhood nostalgia, and again, showing very literally the dehumanization of the oppressed. And it's a very good point. And so I think it definitely shows a very unique usage of the genre and kind of bringing that discussion into the mainstream.
Yeah, I think that's right. And not only the dehumanization, I think, but also what I enjoyed about it was it really, I think, hinted at what does it mean to do sort of community organizing and social movement organizing to overcome oppression in ways that it's always hard to sort of represent that kind of social movement organizing. But they did it in a sort of fun way in this film, the sort of one-on-one conversations that were the hallmark of feminist consciousness raising. But the idea that, liberation of the individual can only happen through collective liberation of the community, and that it should lift not just women over men, but all of us together can be free from patriarchal limitation. There was just so much good stuff I found out of Barbie. So for me, what was most impactful was Barbie. And so in 2024, what am I looking forward to? So, the big thing, of course, that we all have to sort of wonder about is that in 2023 was the writers' strike and the actors' strike that happened in the middle of the year that postponed a lot of work on productions and delayed a lot of different openings of series and films. And so even some schedules are still not very clear. But for 2024, I guess what I'm going to be looking forward to is the final season of Star Trek Discovery is slated to be towards the beginning of 2024. And springtime 2024, I believe, will be also the debut of Dune Part 2. So I want to see how that plays out. So some of the other stuff I think I've heard that I typically tune in to look at has been delayed a lot because of the labor strikes. So we'll see, but I think those two are things that I'm hoping to look forward to, at least in the beginning of 2024. So let's hear from y'all. What were your runners up? What was looking good for you? Most impactful? What are you looking forward to? I'll turn to Kaja, since you're our honored guest. What did you choose?
Okay, so for runners up, we talked about mentioned it briefly, but I particularly enjoyed Star Trek Lower Decks and its fourth season that came out this past year. And it's a very fast-paced, funny, witty, punchy show, but I think that the kind of soft animation style, as well as the use of humor, helps to really delve into topics that in Star Trek they don't always talk about the most, or to point out different kind of flaws in previous plot lines and things like that that can get all kinds of discussions going, particularly among Trekkies. I particularly liked this season of one of the main characters, Beckett Mariner's growth, and showing that growth and character development is not a linear process, because we've seen her kind of struggle in the past, but that it's something that takes time and different circumstances, and again, community support to grow as a person. And the kind of sub theme I feel like for a lot of the characters was, how do you give yourself permission to grow? And that's difficult. It can be scary. And the kind of ideas Lower Decks is that they're kind of the grunts. They're down in it. They don't have to make any command decisions. They're just living their daily lives, and they don't have to think about all the ethical implications. But that actually they're still faced with these on a daily basis. And how do we? I guess it's a lot about personal growth and reflection that we can all relate to, I think, in very meaningful ways. I also really liked the representation. Like, it's very, it's not overt, but it's definitely there, of queerness in Trek that we're seeing more and more, and particularly with Beckett Mariner's character. So Andy from Women at Warp had a conversation at Destination Chicago with the creator Mike McMahon about how she headcanons that Mariner is bisexual because of the finger guns, the kind of chaoticness of her character and sitting weird in chairs. And she's like, if you were just to like put in a line about that, it would be a clear signal to the queer community that she definitely is within the community. And he ended up putting a line in there where she says specifically that she sits funny in chairs. And so that kind of signaling to the queer community was really fun and wonderful to see. And it'd be great to see more overt representation, but also kind of feeding the queer Trek fans was also really wonderful. And then my other runner-up is actually going to be from Japanese animation, which I thought might be something that may not have thought of or seen, but something that came out this last year in June was Okotu, The Inner Chambers. So Okotu, The Inner Chambers is a manga series that was originally written by pardon my pronunciation, Fumi Yoshinaga, and it received many awards in the early 2000s for feminist and science fiction writing within Japan, and it very recently got animated and turned into a Netflix series. And the whole premise of the show is that it's an alternative history in kind of feudal Japan, where there is this sickness that wipes out, I believe, 2/3 of the male population in Japan. And as a result of this, kind of the gender dynamic and culture shifts very radically in a very short amount of time. And the story focuses on kind of the inner social circle of the shogun, who's the leader of the country, who ends up being a woman because all of the male heirs had died. And so instead of it being a man with kind of a female harem, it is a woman with a harem of men, and kind of showing that flip. And I thought, again, that it was really interesting to think about in terms of speculative fiction, because it really gets us to interrogate what are gender norms. Is gender and biological sex something that's predetermined categories? Do they shift? And then when something in society happens, and we just saw a global pandemic recently, where that shift is very possible, right? I think it shows kind of the fact that gender and these categories are all socially constructed and can change. And it gets us to really interrogate why we associate certain things with masculinity or femininity. How do we perform these things? Because we see a woman in charge, and women take on more kind of masculine qualities in this world to show authority, and men take on more feminine qualities. And so those get associated with men. And so it's kind of a role reversal that's maybe too stark, maybe not as nuanced, but definitely an interesting thought experiment. So yeah, those are my runners up. Thanks.
So, what was your big, impactful speculative fiction for 2023?
So my top pick would have to be something I actually saw fairly recently, so I'm still processing it. And that would be The Boy and the Heron by Hayao Miyazaki. It's a film that just recently came out in English, and it is just a fantastical story that is kind of presented as a coming of age, where it focuses on a young boy trying to confront the tragic death of his mother during the Second World War. And in doing this, he gets transported in kind of this alternate reality in which he is tasked with trying to find and save his mother. And it seems quite straightforward, but in fact, it's a very kind of beautiful journey of looking into oneself and having to not just wrestle with grief, but also depression and kind of our human tendency to want to control the unknowns in our lives, or the things that aren't actually in our control, and the grief that comes from that pressure that we put on ourselves when we take on too much responsibility. And in addition to that, we kind of have the very classical themes from Hayao Miyazaki of having very strong women characters taking on kind of non-traditional women's roles within Japanese culture. We also have some subtext on ecology and preserving the natural balance of the world. That's very prevalent in his other themes, as well as critique of imperialism and colonialism, if you wanted to go further into that, and the idea that this idea of control can extend to nations wanting to control other people and places, and that the harm that can come from that. So it was very wonderful, beautifully written, beautifully illustrated. Music was fantastic. All in all, it's something that definitely makes you think for a long time afterwards. So I would highly recommend people see it if they haven't already. And it is rated PG-13, so it's not necessarily for children, even though it's very much a coming of age narrative that's animated. I think it's for everyone to reflect on.
I've heard some good things about that. A couple of friends have recommended and seen that, so I haven't had a chance to check that one out yet, but it's come recommended to me. Yeah, that's a good one. What are you looking forward to in 2024?
Well, same as you, I'm looking forward to the last season of Discovery. I've seen a lot of critique around why they're deciding to make this the last season of Discovery, and so I'm very interested to see how they plan on wrapping up the series as a whole, as well as the final season.
No, I mean, I think for me, season 4 was one of the best, if not the best, of Discovery, and so I feel Discovery finally really made it into its own vision, and so I'm kind of bummed to see it going away. Particularly, I think that Discovery is one of the. It's not a not as much of a fan service as some of the other series, and it's really trying to push like what Star Trek could be. For those of you who don't watch Discovery, right, the latest is that they're in the 31st, 32nd century. So this is really taking us out of a timeline that doesn't focus on so much of the Star Trek heroes and dynasties that we've come to know in so many of the other series. So Discovery is always trying to push some boundaries. And so their last season starting sometime in spring, sadly, but we'll see how that all comes together. You reminded me, Kaja, about something that I saw in 2023 that I was interested, and I've never really been a big anime fan, but I'm starting to note how big of an impact it has. In the class that Randy, Diana, and I taught about going to Comic-Con, when we were talking with students about their most favorite kind of fandoms, really quite amazed to realize that it was either video game or Japanese anime. And so a lot of the stuff that we normally talk about, the kind of like the big IP, was something that very few of them engaged in. But Japanese anime was something that was really sort of big for them. But something that I saw at the end of the year that I really liked, surprisingly, Blue Eye Samurai on
Yes, I knew
Netflix.
you were gonna say that.
Yeah, I mean, if you haven't seen this, it's a really
Oh
quite
my,
compelling story.
it's so good. It's
Yeah,
so good.
yeah, the
Gender
narrative.
role questioning, vengeance versus justice, like,
Yes.
oh, it's
Mhm.
so good. It's
Yeah,
so
I would
good.
have talked about that, I think, if Barbie hadn't been out there, in terms of just the sort of bigger cultural impact. But I think that, uh, quite frankly, I think Blue Eye Samurai has a tighter storyline and much more interesting narrative that's really
Mhm.
compelling. Netflix has okayed it for a second season. I'm not sure when that's necessarily coming out, maybe 2024. But if folks haven't seen Blue Eye Samurai, really, really interesting kind of work. Though not necessarily, maybe it's alternative history. I'm not sure if we call it spec fic, but worthwhile. But the impact, I think, of Japanese anime and manga for so many
Mhm.
people is definitely something that would come to notice. Well, thanks, Kaja. Hey,
Yeah.
let's turn to Robyn. See what you've chosen. So, what runners up for most impactful sci-fi, fantasy, spec fic for 2023? What caught your eye?
Well, for runners up, I think um I'm gonna consciously pick some fantasy. So I think for runners up for me, it's got to be Wheel of Time. Um, I think Wheel of Time does just like an amazing job of looking at lots of different possible futures because it looks at lots of different cultures. and different ways that things have played out in different cultures, right? You've got like the Aiel, and you've got the Tinkerers, and you've got the Aes Sedai, and you have the White Cloaks, and um, the Shan Chan coming over. And in particular, season 2 was so harrowing for me as a woman. Like they had this whole storyline where, if you're not familiar with Wheel of Time, only women really channel. Women are the sort of keepers of the magic system, because currently it drives men insane if they channel. So there's a whole culture that basically enslaves women who can channel by other women. And so like your power is taken over by another woman. And there's been a lot of discourse in the last couple of years about like, what it means to be an ally to other women, particularly as a white woman to women of color, right? So that hit so hard for me. It was so meaningful. Wheel of Time has so much stuff in there to unpack. And then another runner up, I'm gonna have to say Percy Jackson. It just came out. It's only 4 episodes in, but I think the thing that I love about Percy Jackson is it's that classic hero, saga story. But Percy Jackson at the end bucks the system. You know, like if you look at any other kind of fantasy, it's so common for the lead character to sort of get enfolded into the status quo, right? Like if we think about, for example, Harry Potter, at the end of Harry Potter, there's no discussion about like wizard supremacy or the slavery that happens within their society or any of this other kind of stuff. But what's different in Percy Jackson is Percy Jackson goes, no, we're not going back to the status quo. That's not going to happen. Spoiler alert. But I love that. I love a good bucking the system. But as far as most impactful to me, I picked an episode of Strange New Worlds, actually. Ad Astra per Aspera. It's the second episode of the season. It's the one where Una's on trial for being genetically enhanced, for being an I can't say it. Illyrian. No, that's not it. Help me out.
Ilorian?
Is that it? Ilorian. Well, yes, let's go there. So, there's so much to unpack in that episode alone about passing and race and gender and any kind of oppression that you can think of that has been supported and endorsed by the state. This notion about like, if it's legal, is it just? But what I think it got me most thinking about is like, I know when I'm really frustrated with humanity, I often will go, like, can the Vulcans just show up, please? Like, can we just like be in Star Trek now? and and so the episodes where we're looking at the ways in which the universe of Star Trek fails still are important to me because they're a reminder and a warning to never get complacent in our like fight, in our search for justice, and our fight in our search for that better world, that better future, because that's, I think, always going to be on the horizon, right? It's never going to be in this moment. And that's actually another thing that I liked about Barbie, is that critique of second wave feminism is like a question about like, did we actually get there? Right? Because she always says like, "Oh, we've made everything good for women in the real world." Did we though? Did we end up there? Like, did we get to the end? Um, and so I enjoy those warnings, because I think it's easy to get complacent and to say like, "Oh, we've made it." I can rest on my laurels. I'm in the good place or whatever. But I don't know if that's like a place, more as like a something to aim at all the time. So, and then what I'm looking forward to, I'm really looking forward to the second half of Dune. I am really, really looking forward to that last season of Discovery. I have loved Discovery so much, in part because it is so different from all the other Trek. Um, and then, I have like a massive TBR, so I'm going to be reading a lot in 2024. I just set my reading goal actually, 45 books. That's my goal. So
That's ambitious. I always admire people that do those reading goals, and I can never figure out how to do that because my reading schedule is always back and forth with things. But yeah, that's ambitious. No, Percy Jackson, that's Rick Riordan, right?
yep. Yep.
I think my son just picked that up actually to take a look at to start that.
All of his books are good. They're all like winners. I've read every single one except for he has like a retelling of 10,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I haven't read that one. But all of his mythology is so good. He does such a like good job of trying to get representation into his books of like different religions and different cultures and different genders and different sexualities. Like there's queer representation, there's differently abled representation. He's doing a pretty good. He's pretty okay.
It's funny. I've never read any of those books, but I have copies, first editions of all of his noir mystery books.
Oh, he's such a good author. I'm eternally impressed with him. I don't know.
And Wheel of Time is something that the first season I really I enjoyed, and I know that the second season dropped. I just haven't had time to check it out. There was so much in 2023 that came out.
Beware. Yeah, there's some stuff. One of the main characters gets like actually captured by the Shan Chan, so she is one of the people in this collar that they put them in to basically force them to do whatever they want. It's horrific.
Wow.
It's incredibly moving.
The last thing I wanted to say about that was I thought of you, Robyn, in thinking about Strange New Worlds. I'm surprised that you chose that one, which was a good episode, like one of the courtroom dramas, right? Of like that follows in the tradition of Trek of like what does it mean to be human, or what does it mean to be inclusive? But one of the latter episodes was I rewatched it just the other night too, and I'm gonna use it for some of my classes, but. I think it was episode 8, Under the Cloak of War, that brings up these issues of war trauma, which is something that I think that there's been discussions about how more recent Star Trek has really talked about dealing with the trauma of various forms of violence. And in this particular episode, deals a lot with veteran PTSD and the willingness of governments to cover over war crimes and crimes of humanity for larger sort of political goals. Always a big thing that is, the part of the Star Trek sort of discussion. But there was a really interesting conversation at the end of that where there's a conversation about forgiveness and justice. And if you haven't seen it, go see it. So, spoiler alert, there's a question, Dr. Joseph Mbenga, who is a veteran of the Klingon Wars from Discovery. There's someone who dies on board under mysterious circumstances, and Mbenga is implicated in the death of this individual as a Klingon ambassador. And Mbenga looks at Captain Pike, who's talking about, forgiveness. Can't we, sort of think about mercy and forgiveness and all these good things? And Mbenga turns to him and says, that's what's great, about the Federation is that people like you can sort of hope for the best and look for the best in people. But some of us, can't do that. Some things are not forgivable. Some things are eternally broken. And I know a lot of the commentary about that episode was like, this is the most un-Trek thing. We should always be about forgiveness. And yeah, I mean, that's represented in that discussion by Pike, who is always the sort of like Boy Scout kind of, that's sort of belittling. I mean, these are important ideals that Pike stands for, forgiveness and giving people second chances. But There was something really gritty about that episode by thinking about like, how does war damage people? And I
Yeah.
think I almost chose that episode just because, I mean, of course, 2023, the year of at least two major ongoing conflicts that capture the news all the time, Ukraine and Palestine, tremendous damage and devastation, all of these accusations of war crimes and crimes against humanity, right? It was a very tough year for war violence. And this episode really spoke to how damaging that can be, that in some cases it hurts people irreparably.
Yeah.
And that's heavy.
And honestly, they did an excellent job with it. I am often very critical of the way that we didn't say this, but I'm a Marine. I'm a veteran of the Iraq War, and I'm often very critical of the way that we depict PTSD in media and in books and whatnot, because I think it does a lot of damage to veterans and the way that we depict it. But Star Trek did a really wonderful job depicting it the way that they did, and the struggle that Mbenga has, and especially because like there's a deeper story there to be told about like what is happening when you choose to make friends or make nice with this enemy, or what do we say to veterans that have put so much on the line for that sort of thing, right? So like that's what he's struggling with, is like, what am I being told? Was all of this sacrifice for nothing, you know? Um and Percy Jackson has a like something to say about that too, at the end, right? Because there's a war that happens in Percy Jackson, and who fights it? It's the demigods. It's not the gods. The demigods are sort of thrown away by these people who are in charge to fight this war that they started, you know? And it's very much the experience of veterans in the United States today is like, okay, well, we fight this war, we sacrifice for the country, and then we're sort of thrown away or trotted out as like a political pawn, when it suits whoever. So yeah, Trek did a really, really nice job with that episode and its depictions of PTSD and war trauma. So, but you know me, my favorite Star Trek episode of all time is the meaning of or the making of a man, or the meaning of a man when Data is on trial. So
Yeah.
I couldn't skip over this one.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I really appreciate your commentary too on this idea of complacency and trying to combat complacency. And I think that going back to Andor, that was one of the main messages I got from that too, is this idea that, now we're in peacetime, everything's fine, when actually there's a lot that's still going on, and we have to constantly be interrogating that. And I think the actor's name is evading me right now. He's an excellent, excellent Korean Canadian actor, and he plays the fighter pilot who kind of has to go against the rules, right? And he has to follow his conscience. And I think his character is so key in that, and also later in the Mandalorian series, because it's that constant questioning about what is the right thing, and sometimes that's not the lawful thing. And I also think that that second episode of Discovery was so impactful because it shows so many complexities when it came to it. It made me think of Sami rights and Indigenous rights, and how a lot of these kinds of situations, it's realistically in these cases, it usually is 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Mm-hmm.
Like for her, like initially they were going for kind of putting the entire group of people on Una's shoulders, and then had to kind of dial it back. And so still pointing out that there was a wrong that needs to be righted, but weren't able to quite get as far as they wanted to, and kind of having to be content with it's just a start, and showing that you always have to be working forward and ahead, and also being kind of Sami American in that very special place that Una is, where she's kind of in between groups of people, and how members of the Illyrians, they see her kind of as a traitor, or having more privileges because she didn't continue to grow up within the culture. She just came from it. And that also kind of struck me personally too, and something that saw that like how kind of internal conflict within an oppressed group can happen too because of these nuances that don't oftentimes get discussed. So I agree, it was fantastic, and it was also a very classic courtroom case that does call back to Measure of a Man, and you do get kind of the best scenes out of those. Like it's the best Guinan Picard scene in the whole series comes from that episode. So
Yeah,
yeah, it was a great call.
I rewatched it yesterday and I still cried. Like it's still, I was just like, oh God, this is so good. This is so good.
Yeah, the other big trial episode, right? Again in TNG, the Drumhead. So Star Trek likes to do these trial shows. Lower Decks has made fun of this, right? Right. At a certain point, there's a Captain Carol Freeman is put on trial, and then you expect that you're going to drop into the trial to see what happens, and then the next scene is like, oh, it's over, right? It's like the lower deckers don't get to be the people who get to watch these trials. But so Randy, I know that we've been talking a lot of Star Trek here, a little bit of Star Wars here and there. Last but not least, let's talk to you, and maybe you'll bring up some Star Wars, and we can talk some Star Wars here, which like I said at the beginning, I really like some stuff that was going on. What were your runners up for most impactful spec fic in 2023?
I had several. I mean, I really liked The Last of Us. I thought was very strong. Ashoka, of course, I really liked. One you might not think of was Asteroid City by Wes Anderson, which is kind of a sci-fi show actually, but it was visually beautiful, had really lots of nice things going on in it. And my other last kind of runner-up was Rick and Morty season 7. It went off on a new trajectory, and there was some stuff that was pretty heavy and pretty dark in some of that. Rick's in therapy, in part of it, and he's learning things about himself. He eventually kills Rick Prime, beats him to death, which was pretty heavy. And Little Morty too, one where they go into a pit where you face your greatest fear, and Morty finds out that his greatest fear is the fear of losing Rick, leaving him. And there was one all about suicide too, that was really deep and kind of dark. So that's a new trajectory for them. But the ones that really kind of left an impression on me more than anything else, both I think have to do a lot with this idea about how you deal with fascism. And one of those was season 2 of Foundation, which is pretty heavy. And the other one was the series Silo, which was taking from the book Wool by Hugh Howey. And what I really liked about them a lot was that these are driven by really super powerful women characters. And the protagonists are very strong women. And in Foundation, especially, the number of people of color that are represented in that series is incredible. You just don't normally see that. And, very strong. And I thought that as I was watching it, I watched Foundation as a binge. I watched all 20 episodes in about 6 days. And early on, I was thinking, who's the most compelling character in this? Empire, of course, the three of them were strong and all this stuff, and their whole fascist government. But the whole time I was thinking the most compelling character to me is Lady Ito Dermazel, the robot, the gynoid. And then you find by the end of season 2, she's the protagonist of the whole thing. She's driving everything that goes on, and she can't get beyond her programming. And I just thought that was really great. And there was a statement in there that Jared Harris's character says, where he tells one of the women characters, Salvor, several times, don't let your perception of morals get in the way of you making a good decision. And I thought that was really powerful, and then that it came up a couple of times. And the other one they keep repeating throughout it is, if a planet wants you dead, you die. And, talking about this planet whose the water keeps rising, and, there's no land anymore, and everything is gone. And so that whole story is very powerful. I never read the books, but the show really captured me. But Silo, I had read the book Wolf, and that was, I think, several years ago, and we did one of these. I said that was my best science fiction of the year, was the book Wolf. But the way this was filmed, the lead character, Rebecca Ferguson, very powerful. She plays, what's his name? Paul Atreides' mother in Dune. And she is the protagonist in this. And the sense of claustrophobia in how that series is filmed, all in this darkness, in this underground 165-story silo. And then the driving parts of this story are very, very powerful. But again, it's these really powerful central figures that are running this fascist government in both cases, and don't care about the suffering of anyone else, as long as things run the way they want it to and there's no waves. Let's select who we want for these positions. Let everything run that way, and don't ask questions. You ask questions, you're in trouble. And yeah, I just found both of those incredibly compelling science fiction. And even though Foundation, I'm not sure if that's really sci-fi, because there is a little mysticism going on in there as well. But yeah, it captured my attention and really held me to the point where I'd have dreams about them after watching a couple episodes and go to bed at night. So it was implanted in my head pretty solidly what was taking place there. As to what I'm looking forward to in the coming year is hopefully season 2 of Andor. I really think that's the great Star Wars part of the universe. I think the Last of Us, the second season, is coming of that as well. And it was interesting in watching Ashoka. I don't know when the next season is, probably in 25 for that. But as I watched that whole series, and we talked about this in my science fiction class with my students too, saying what would be very interesting is somewhere down the road in a film possibly that there is an encounter between an older Ashoka and Rey Skywalker, to see how this woman who thinks everything's got to be, the Jedi way and everything, has an encounter finally with someone who is technically a gray Jedi, and realizes that it can't all be one way or the other. You have to have this combination or it doesn't work. And I thought Ashoka was very interesting and told a good story this year as well. So it'd be nice to see it continue and where they're going to take it. It's kind of on my list.
Yeah, I know a lot of people have talked about Ashoka as simply continuing on like the sort of as the live action version of the animated series, but there are elements of the story that I think are going on that sort of tie into the kind of themes that we've been talking about. Like, of course, Andor was a lot about the question about like fascism and empire, like, and particularly like what's so attractive about that to ordinary people. So, like, what would turn people into willing and obedient participants of the empire and of fascist mentality? And it's a very sort of complex look at those kinds of psychological measures in a lot of different ways. So Andor is really, really interesting in that regard. I'm finding it interesting that the ones that you mentioned, Randy, particularly like Foundation stuff like this. There's a lot of emphasis in a lot of stuff nowadays about the question about dealing with empire. And maybe this is an old sci-fi theme in general, but it seems very prominent in a lot of different ways. I found this in Ashoka too, with this kind of worry about, of course, dealing with the empire. But, again, I'm going to go to Baylan Skoll here. This kind of mood too of this wariness of like, I just wish that the cycles of back and forth between good and bad would end, right? He seems to be on this search for a greater power that would end the conflicts between the Jedi and the Sith, that would bring everything to some kind of closure. which I think is a dangerous aspiration. And so even though he's I like him as a character, I think that the kind of impulse that he has are really dangerous. But I think it speaks to sort of a larger political attitude where I think a lot of people are frustrated with sort of, what alternatives out there, right? And particularly in the United States, I was looking at various kinds of political polling data that was asking people about upcoming U.S. presidential elections. And, based on polling data now, people are really, really just turned off by what seems to be the matchup that's coming in November, a Trump versus a Biden. And so many people, particularly what I noticed based on this one poll, was that young people are just turned off by the whole thing. And many of them are just talking about perhaps not even engaging in the political process. So the Skoll, the Balin Skoll kind of aspiration, I just wish this would end and we could come to a different kind of world. I think that's a real mood. I think that captured a real mood, especially amongst young people. But it's a dangerous one, I think, because it can lead, I think, to the very kind of fascism that we talk about. And I guess actually in the Star Wars universe, I mean, all of this is building towards the building of the First Order, sort of the neo-Nazi regime. So I think that what we're seeing in a lot of the TV series and also in some of these films is like the sort of complexifying the psychology of the empire. And I think you're seeing this too in Star Trek, right? Where you're mentioning, Robyn, the idea of people thinking about like, how good are these ideals of the Federation any longer? Like, are they realistic? And what does it mean to work for them? And and like that discussion between Mbenga and Pike, these are really nice, but does it match the reality of the really ugliness and the complexities of violence and war in our world? So in some ways, these are, I mean, I think you're talking too about like Rick and Morty. These are dark themes, but I think there's a mood of a lot of sort of like darkness going on in our world that's interestingly, I think, reflected in the kinds of stories that we're seeing in a lot of these fandoms.
Yeah, I think that the image of Thrawn coming back Admiral Thrawn trying to like start this, probably the First Order, and go down that fascist road again. But it's interesting you're talking about Balin Skoll. I think that the themes that you're talking about are very similar to the same ideas that drove Dooku to make his choices. And in doing that, he precipitated this massive clone war and, the robot uprising, because he was doing two things at once to face against each other. And it basically brought everything down. But his idea was he was trying to even things out. And it, of course, was a complete catastrophe. So
yeah, that's good. That's good. I hadn't thought about that. I mean, something else that I really liked. I don't know if this was premiered in 2023, but I started watching it in 2023. The Tales of the Jedi, which has several of the short episodes devoted to the tales of Count Dooku. And again, so these are animated shorts, very interesting, but psychologically really compelling because they really sort of, again, investigate this kind of question of like, what exactly does this republic stand for? And particularly the elitism of the republic society and the complicity of the Jedi in all forms of, all these ugly forms of oppression of planets and slavery and predatory capitalism and all this kind of stuff. And they're willing to sort of overlook this for their weird sort of mystic kind of like devotion to the Force. That comes out in these shorts and sort of show the motivation of Dooku to want to sort of overcome all of this, and of course that leads then to the, like you were saying, the violence of the prequels. So I mean, I think that there is something very similar between Dooku and Balin Skoll and this aspiration of wanting, these back and forth things that we get sort of fed up with being over with. But we have to be careful with that because politically that can lead to really sort of like disastrous falling aparts of institutions, distrust, a sense that nothing is legitimate anymore. And when that breakdown of institutions and distrust starts to happen, lots of bad things can take place. And so, looking forward to 2024, there's a lot of stuff that I'm really worried about in 2024, politically speaking, that I think our stories sort of all hint at in some way or another.
One of the things I found interesting in Foundation is I can't recall the name of the planet, but it's the planet where Gail comes from in the story. And she wins this math contest and goes off somewhere. And the thing is, on the planet she lives on, to study or do anything that seems scientific is a death sentence. You're executed. And that's one of the early parts of the story is she witnesses the execution of a guy who had worked at the university and had gone back to get books. They capture him, executed. And so she gets away to study math on another planet because she is self-taught. And that's this theme. And then I see this morning on TV, they were giving the statistics about what people in America right now think is the value of higher education. And what it was 5 years ago, the 60 percentages or something for people who were on a more progressive mindset is now 48%. And if you looked at people who were on the conservative, well, I won't want to say conservative, let's say the far right end of things, they only look at the value of a higher education as somewhere between 18 and 19%. So they're devaluing, critical thinking skills, which of course makes you much more easy to manipulate and makes you ripe for fascism. So, and Joseph, you and I have talked before that the most cynical thing that I think has happened in the last 30 years was No Child Left Behind, where you don't get money to support your school from the government if you don't follow these standardized tests. And so that suppresses really excellent students, slows them down, and you're trying to lift up people who aren't doing so good. And so you help them a lot. So you get your money, and then they end up moving forward without the critical thinking skills and education they really need. And as educators, I see it in my courses where people's ability to read and write, do simple mathematics, has really been suppressed, especially in the last number of years. And when you add on the people who have been set back because of the COVID years, they're just not where people need to be, but that makes you very easy then to be manipulated. That might have been the long-term plan for all we know, but yeah.
Yeah, I get told by kids
Mhm.
all the time nowadays, it's not that deep.
Right.
Like if I could pick out a sentence that my own children say to me more often than not is it's not that deep, and I want to be like, no, it really is that deep. Like,
Yeah.
it's that deep. Let's talk about why it's that deep.
And yeah, I think that's why discussions like these are so important and that we critique and talk about the kind of popular culture and speculative fiction that we're consuming. And that's something that I always try to encourage my students to do, even if I'm just teaching introductory Spanish, right? It's just like textual analysis and being able to critically approach the things that we're consuming, whether it's our textbook or whether it's a piece of popular culture. Like it's just so important that we think on that level, that we do get that depth. For sure, for sure. And could I just mention one thing that's slightly off topic, but that I want to say really quickly? We're talking about Star Wars. That The Mandalorian season 3 also came out this last year, and I just wanted to do a really brief shout out to that one as well, because not necessarily that this was the writer's intention, which I think a lot of the things that they did was fascinating. Again, like I mentioned before, about interrogating this new republic and is it all that we hoped it would be, but also that Indigenous communities have really been claiming the Mandalorians and Mandalorian culture, and they saw that storyline of taking Mandalore back as very much a land back narrative. And I think that when you look at it through that lens, it is so incredibly powerful. And who is it led by? Two women. And it's really wonderful if you view it through that lens. And a lot of the things that Pedro Pascal's character, the Mandalorian, has said, that people have taken those quotes and been like, like we kind of claim this as part of our ideology and what we mean, and talking about the importance of culture and land and and that. And so kind of taking it back from not fascists, right? The empire, no less, was a really powerful moment. And again, showing that it needs community in order to make this happen. They had to bring back kind of a diasporic people to make it work. But that's also true for in previous seasons how the Mandalorian has interacted with the Tusken Raiders and how they've very much tried to indigenize them quite intentionally, which I have mixed feelings about. It's at least a good recognition that they were based off of very stereotypical and harmful ideas of Bedouin people in the North African region. And so I think trying to rectify that somewhat and using an indigenous actor to try and bolster that and flesh out that culture and make it more indigenous. So I think it's just really interesting that you have that and you have indigenous communities claiming Grogu, like the child, is part of their groups. And then by extension, we have this whole kind of land back arc that I think is absolutely incredible and led completely by women. And I love how even though Pedro Pascal is kind of the central protagonist, he very respectfully defers to both women in the Mandalorian society. And anyway, I really loved that narrative. Have always been obsessed with Mandalorians, and 9-year-old me would have lost it if I'd seen 2 women Mandalorians taking over an entire planet together. So I'm really happy that that exists.
I was going to say one other thing that I found very interesting about privilege that I read science fiction was this book, Titanium Noir. And it's about a culture here on Earth where if you're very, very rich, you can get an injection of something called T7. And it'll heal you if you have anything wrong physically with you, but it practically doubles you in size. So you end up being 8 feet tall, 350, 400 pounds, but you maintain all of your same agility. And as you age, it suppresses your age, but it's only if you're really rich. So the really rich and the powerful people already keep getting bigger, where they can oppress everybody even more. And it was just a real interesting premise. I'd never, seen something like that before in a science fiction book. And it's a murder mystery on top of it. Well, one of them is killed, but it takes a normal-sized detective that they hire to try to solve this case. I found a very compelling story. So, but again, about privilege. These people are rich, so you can get bigger. Now you can oppress people even more.
I like a lot of allegory in that. A lot of allegory in that. There's so much deeper. So much to it. It is that deep.
It is that deep.
Yeah,
Stop telling me that.
Yeah, I love this conversation, y'all. We could go on for a long time, and I think there's a lot of things that we can sort of pick up in the new year. I hope that we can. But I want to wrap this up so that we can get this in the can and get this out so we can share our thoughts with people. But let me say thank you to each of you, Randall Millstein, Robyn, and Kaja. I appreciate you being here back. Robyn being back. Kaja, I'm glad that you're here, and I hope that we can talk a little bit more in 2024 and do some more programming. But thank you all for your insights. I really enjoyed this, and so I'm going to start looking back on some things now, and we'll make sure to sort of put our highlights and things in our program notes so that people can take a look at it. But I want to say thank you to you all.
You're quite welcome, and I hope both of you end up moving to the Pacific Northwest.
Me too.
Yeah. Me too. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, well, and thank you all for listening and viewing in. If you have comments, if you've seen some of the works or read some of the works that we've talked about, please go ahead and leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. If you disagree with some of our choices, tell us why. What would have been better choices to make for 2023 in your opinion? Leave us some comments, leave us some thoughts. You can follow the Anarres Project on a variety of different social media. You can get us at our website, which is anarresproject.org, but you can get us on Facebook, on Instagram. We are on X, formerly Twitter. We are also on Blue Sky and Mastodon. So we're on a variety of places. So there's no excuse for not talking to us. So let us know what you think about the best choices that you had for sci-fi and spec fic in 2023 that pushed your radical imagination. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you all very much.
Stay shiny.